Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another lore video. Today's topic will be centered around Vlad von Carstein, so without further ado, let's begin. The creature that would eventually be known as Vlad von Carstein was born many years ago in the lands of Nehekhara, millennia before the Empire was even founded. His name was Vashanesh, and he was the son of a Nehekharan king. Born with the blood of the third Nehekharan dynasty, Vashanesh and his line were direct descendants of Nagash himself. For many of his days, he lived a life of leisure, undisturbed and uncontested. That is until King Setep of Khemri, who had been otherwise occupied conquering the lands that would eventually be the Empire, turned his attention to the lands of Lemir to the east. Vashanesh was a commander in Setep's armies, and knew that his father's small kingdom would eventually be destroyed or absorbed. Not keen on any of these options, he sought allies to make a stand against Setep, realizing his best option was Setep's target, the beautiful queen of Lemir, Neferata, who unbeknownst to him was a vampire. Upon his arrival to Lemir, Vashanesh was captured, and he would have surely been put to death were it not for the knowledge of Setep's plans. He was brought before Queen Neferata to be personally interrogated. His revelations were at first unbelieved by Neferata's court, with many of her court wishing to execute him. But his pride and self-control impressed the queen. She believed that she could trust him, and thus invited Vashanesh to become part of Queen Neferata's court, to act as an advisor and potentially a military general, eventually having more and more private meetings with the beautiful queen. Neferata and Vashanesh quickly began a romantic relationship, eventually falling in love, where then Neferata revealed her vampiric nature. And after some time, she gifted the last of the elixir of life to Vashanesh, thus transforming him into a vampire. Vashanesh and Neferata planned to rule Lemir together as king and queen. And rule they did. The local populace was kept in line, fearful of the powerful king and queen and their extremely dangerous servants. And the population of vampires dramatically increased. Spies would also be sent around Nehekhara to cause as much turmoil as possible. This even halted King Setep's invasion plans, and Lemir was left undisturbed for many centuries, with any possible chance of Nehekharan unification being quickly thwarted. That is until the re-emergence of King Alcadizar, a former consort to Queen Neferata. He had wished vengeance upon her for all that she had done, and built a massive force, further strengthened by the conquered lands of Araby and the Southlands. Alcadizar wished to destroy all the dead that lay in Lemir, and thus laid siege to the city as soon as he could. The vampires and their army of undead servants fought as hard as they could, but eventually they were repelled and then defeated, forcing the vampires to retreat from the city. And it was during their escape that they managed to cross paths with a now reborn Nagash, who had secretly been orchestrating events for many years due to some of his servants being hidden members in Neferata's court. Here it was revealed that the vampires were bound to serve him. Nagash, knowing that Vashanesh was of his own blood and perhaps hoping that Vashanesh shared his ambition, placed him in command of the vampires, and gifted him a magical ring which would allow any vampire who were to fall in battle to return from the dead, sealing the fate of all other vampires, as now they were all fully under Nagash's control. This magical ring would eventually be known as the famed von Carstein ring. At first the vampires were eager to serve, wishing to get revenge over King Alcadizar. But as more and more battles took place, the vampires realized that Nagash cared little for the vampires and saw them as expendable. That wasn't until a great battle between Nagash's forces and the forces of Al-Qadizar. There Vashanesh came up with a plan, as he suspected that Nagash only held over him and the rest of the vampires while he lived, and that his ring would eventually return him to unlife. He challenged King Al-Qadizar to a duel, but willingly threw it in hopes of being slain. Vashanesh was defeated and slain in battle, and the hold that Nagash had over the vampires quickly broke, which many of the vampires took advantage of and began their retreat, in hopes of escaping Nagash's eventual wrath. It was here, when Nagash's armies were being defeated, that he cursed the vampires for their treachery, declaring that forevermore they would feel pain when in sunlight. Eventually, Vashanesh would be returned to unlife. At what point in the timeline is unspecified. But one thing was certain: the ring was powerful. It could allow him to live forever, and return should he ever get killed. And with Nagash now gone, he should take his time, study and master the capabilities of this ring. His studies took him traveling across the world. Eventually, he changed his name to Vladimir, also known as Vlad. This was possibly done to stay under the radar, just in case any of Nagash's followers yet lived. He would drift in and out of recorded history, never staying in one location for too long, traveling to the lands of Kislev and beyond. After a few centuries of traveling and studying his magical ring, Vlad believed the time was now right to make his return. He donned the name Vlad von Carstein and made his reappearance in the lands of Sylvania, a land of much turmoil and instability, where its count was laying on his deathbed. Otto von Drac ruled over Sylvania with an iron fist for many years. Eventually, time caught up with the Mad Count, and he found himself dying. He had no male heirs to continue his legacy, instead only a daughter, the beautiful and sadistic Isabella, and it would seem that the title of Count would fall to his brother Leopold. A fact that enraged Otto, as he would rather see Sylvania burnt down to the ground than being under command of his brother. Conveniently, this is where Vlad made his reappearance. Arriving at the doors of Castle Drakenhof at the dead of night, Vlad demanded entry. Claiming to be a noble of foreign lands, he requested an audience with the dying count, and expressed a desire to marry Isabella von Drac. Otto, not knowing anything about this man, but desperate for his brother not to rule over Sylvania, hastily agreed. Vlad and Isabella were then quickly married, and interestingly enough, Otto died shortly after. Sylvania now fell into the hands of Vlad von Carstein and Isabella von Carstein. It is important to note that this was at first a marriage of convenience for Vlad, yet he found himself quite curious about his beautiful and sadistic bride. His vampiric charm seemed to have no effect on her, a fact that only made his curiosity grow larger and larger, with Vlad eventually falling in love with this stubborn woman, as her strong will was mirrored by that of his own. He began to court her in more traditional senses, and eventually his feelings were reciprocated. Vlad and Isabella would rule over Sylvania as a couple with no equal for many years. The local populace was kept in check, and those who disobeyed would conveniently disappear. Nothing could stop them, save for the passage of time. Isabella eventually became deathly ill. Vlad was unwilling to lose his love of loves, and searched far and wide for a cure to this illness, contacting doctors and physicians throughout the known world, but none could save her. Vlad saw no other option, and gave Isabella the blood kiss in order to turn her into a vampire. It is important to note that Vlad did not wish to turn her into a vampire, as he did not want his love to suffer as he has. But this was a desperate time, and he, being so madly in love with Isabella, could not imagine any day without her. Isabella rose again in unlife, with Vlad claiming that he had found the cure. Any of the local populace which would ask too many questions were quickly silenced and disappeared. Once again reunited in strength, the couple continued to establish order across the turbulent land. Lesser-known lords of Sylvania were asked to swear loyalty to Vlad and Isabella. Those who agreed enjoyed protection, and those who did not were quickly disposed of and replaced with more willing lords. Sylvania saw for the first time ever some resemblance of peace. Any rebellions were quelled, and banditry was almost non-existent now, for darker things lay in the forests. It would seem that for the first time in recorded history, order had finally come to Sylvania, something that was alien to the local peasantry, but they knew better than to ask questions and embrace the change. Possibly knowing that the creatures that dwelt in the darkness answered to the Count and Count alone, and should they comply, they should be safe. These dark creatures would patrol the borders of Sylvania. Not many could come in or leave this dark land. Occasionally, these agents would be seen leaving the borders, traveling and then returning, days, weeks, months, even years later. What they were doing was unknown to the local peasantry, but many did start to notice that the more agents that returned, the darker Sylvania became. But once again, the peasants would not ask that many questions, totally submitting to the rule of the von Carsteins. Vlad and Isabella ruled together for many years, with generations of peasantry coming and going. Sylvania was truly living in a dystopian golden age, with the local peasants even claiming that perhaps Vlad should rule over the empire as he rules over Sylvania. A claim that somewhat interested Vlad due to his pride and ambition, and was further fueled by his wife Isabella. With plans eventually being made to take over the empire, Vlad sired many new vampires and began to raise the dead of Sylvania to create an undead host. He would call upon the local armies and lords of Sylvania. Those who complied quickly got ready, for they feared Vlad's wrath. But those who denied were quickly slain and raised into undeath. When the time was right, Vlad would strike at the empire with an army of both the living and the dead. Vlad's armies would sweep across the empire. He found little resistance. Those who were captured were given two options: serve him in life or serve him in death. His armies near unbeatable, swelling dramatically with every city they captured. The only diversion to Vlad's plans was when he was struck down by a prisoner, much to the confusion of the other vampires, as they had no idea that Vlad could revive. They began to bicker and fight amongst themselves in an effort to seize power, but within the same day, Vlad returned, and his unholy crusade continued, eventually to the seat of the empire itself, Altdorf, with his armies now dramatically swollen due to the countless numbers of Imperials who had been slain and raised to undeath. A great siege took place. The undead assaulted the living. Many died, and hope seemed to have been lost. Vlad surely would have been ruling over the empire in no time at all, were it not for the betrayal of one of his own. You see, one of his sired vampires wished to take control. Knowing full well that as long as Vlad were to live, he would not be able to do so, he started to plot against him. Eventually coming into contact with the Grand Theogenist Wilhelm of Altdorf, informing him of Vlad's secret to immortality, and the only way to defeat him was to remove the ring from his hand. With that knowledge, a thief known as Felix Mann was contacted to steal the ring, successfully doing so. And when Vlad awakened, he had realized that his ring was missing, and in a fit of pure rage, he marched his army to Altdorf's gates, surmising that his ring must be there. The undead fought more furiously than ever before, and it looked like the city would have fallen. But now that he was unaided by the power of his ring, he could now die, and the Grand Theogenist knew this. He challenged Vlad to a duel, knowing full well he would not survive. For when the vampire got too close, this was his moment. He grabbed a hold of Vlad and threw himself off the battlements, both falling and impaling themselves on the wooden spikes below. Vlad had now been killed, his army started to crumble, and the vampires dispersed. Isabella, not being able to bear living on in undeath without the love of her husband, threw herself over the battlements and died in the same way. Vlad had been ended, never to be seen again. Or so we thought. During the end times, Nagash, who had once again returned, revived Vlad von Carstein, and managed to get him to swear loyalty after promising to revive Isabella. Vlad had an active role during the end times, secretly aiding the Empire, and then outright aiding them, marching a large undead host to aid the Imperials in fighting back the Chaos forces, eventually even being recognized as an ally to the Imperials, receiving a seal of office, but not a runefang. It is interesting to note that many now considered Vlad to be Sylvania's legitimate ruler. Sadly though, news had come to him. Isabella had been revived, but not by Nagash's power, but by the power of Nurgle. A demon possessed her body. She was not herself, and she was leading a grand host of Nurgles of Demon to Sylvania, eventually confronting her in battle, but being forced to flee, for he had been poisoned before and was severely weakened. He was also not willing to end the life of Isabella, possessed or not. He was forced to retreat, eventually finding safe haven in Athaloran, but was quickly teleported to Middenheim, for the armies of Chaos were massing upon it. Here he fought valiantly, but once again came face to face with Isabella. Once again he was not willing to destroy his one true love, so he removed his ring and forced it upon her finger. Mirroring his death from so many years ago, he grabbed her and threw himself off the battlements. They landed on the stakes below. Vlad was killed, but Isabella survived. For he knew the power of the ring would revive her, and he would gladly give his life for her, for nothing was more precious than Isabella. Vlad was now dead, never to return, for the world had ended shortly after. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you all again very, very soon.